One of the most remarkable halachot that have to do with brachot and eating a meal is Kuf Ayin Zayin 177, Seif Aleph, the first paragraph. And that paragraph says this: anything you eat in the meal which come as part of the meal. And he says, and the Shulchan Aruch says, what I mean is the things that people usually eat in a meal, which go along somehow with the bread that you're eating. So the bread is the basis. It's the essential food that you eat. And everything else goes with it. And then the Shulchan Aruch goes through a long list of food that goes along with the bread: meat and fish and eggs and vegetables and cheese and cereal and all kinds of things that are, well, we get them in cans today, like pickles and those kinds of things. And he says, even if the food itself is not eaten with a piece of bread, like I eat a pickle without a piece of bread, or I eat a piece of meat without a piece of bread, the Shulchan Aruch says, in spite of the fact that you're eating this food independently of the bread that you ate at the beginning, you don't have to make any brachot on that food, because the bracha that you made at the beginning of the meal, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, somehow takes care of all the brachot. And similarly, you don't have to make after brachot on all of those things that you have eaten, because Birkat HaMazon takes care of everything. And that's some sort of a rule. If it's part of the Su'udah, and if you began with Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, you don't make any brachot, and you say Birkat HaMazon at the end, and the Birkat HaMazon goes for everything that you've eaten. However, Imei Dvarim, but if the food comes and is not really part of the Su'udah, and what's the rule? How do I know if it's part of the meal or it's not part of the meal? He says, well, it's not something that we commonly eat as part of a meal. So dates and grapes and fruit, all of that comes at the end of the meal, actually after the meal. So that today, if you eat a meal, meat and fish and bread and potatoes, and you don't make any brachot. But if the end of the meal, according to the Shulchan Aruch, your host brings out figs and fruit and grapes, then you have to make a bracha. If you don't eat them with the pot, in other words, the pot could still exclude the grapes from the bracha if you eat them together. But it's not obvious that if you don't eat them together, that somehow the grapes are there because of the pot, that somehow the pot influences the grapes, and therefore you have to make a bracha before, for example, before you eat the grapes, before you eat the dates, etc. Because the Shulchan Aruch says these things are not part of the essential meal. They're not part of the essential meal. In other words, you wouldn't feel, if your host did not give you the grapes at the end, you wouldn't feel you hadn't eaten the meal. Of course you've eaten a meal. So that the grapes are not part of the menu. They're not part of the original menu, and therefore you have to make a bracha before you eat the grapes, unless you eat them with bread mamash, a piece of bread and the grape at the same time. And however, you don't have to make a bracha after the grapes, since after all they are still part of the Su'udah. De facto, they become part of the Su'udah. Then Birkat Hamazon Potartan. We're allowed to make one Birkat Hamazon for the bread, for the food that we ate in the Su'udah, which was certainly part of the Su'udah, and for the food that we ate in the Su'udah, which was not so much part of the Su'udah. Birkat Hamazon covers them all. We have to make a bracha on the bread. We don't have to make a bracha on the foods in the Su'udah. We do have to make a bracha on the peirot, on the fruit, unless we eat the fruit with the bread, and we make one Birkat Hamazon, which covers everything in this.